Sally Struthers is on the cover, and if you've read the article, you found out that Carroll O'Connor apparently is not too happy with Sally's new show.
Carroll O'Connor and Sally Struthers were once the best of friends, both on television and in real life. They worked together on one of America's most famous TV shows, but their friendship ended suddenly and mysteriously. For many years, nobody knew what happened between them. Then, when O'Connor was 74 years old, he finally told the world the truth about what went wrong. When All in the Family first appeared on television in 1971, few people expected it would become such an important show. The main character was Archie Bunker, a gruff and opinionated man played by Carroll O'Connor. His passionate and strong-willed daughter, Gloria, was played by Sally Struthers. On the show, they often argued and fought, but their scenes together showed real love beneath all the conflict. What viewers didn't know was that off-camera, O'Connor and Struthers had developed a genuine friendship that was just as strong as what they showed on screen. Even though there was a 30-year age difference between them, they formed a bond that felt like a real father and daughter relationship. People who worked on the show said their connection was immediate and obvious from the very beginning. During rehearsals, the two actors would often sit together, sharing jokes and talking about their lines. They genuinely cared about each other, and it showed in their performances. O'Connor, who didn't have a daughter in real life, often called Struthers "my girl." She talked about him in interviews as her mentor and protector, sometimes even calling him a father figure. They would arrive at the studio early just to practice their scenes together, even when they didn't have to. Between filming, Struthers was often seen sitting next to O'Connor, laughing at his jokes or asking him for advice. In interviews and press events, they always spoke highly of each other. O'Connor praised her acting skills and timing, while Struthers credited him with helping her learn how to work professionally in Hollywood. Their real friendship made their TV relationship even more believable. While Archie Bunker was known for saying controversial things and having strong opinions, his love for his daughter Gloria made him seem more human and caring. The tender moments between them on screen weren't just acting, they came from something real. Other people who worked on the show remembered how close they remained, even after the cameras stopped rolling. When Struthers got other acting jobs or projects, O'Connor would call her or send her encouraging notes. She once said that he was one of the first people to congratulate her when she won Emmy Awards. He wasn't just proud of her success, he was genuinely invested in helping her career grow. This kind of friendship was unusual in Hollywood, where age differences, egos, and competition often keep people apart. Even away from the TV studio, their relationship was special. They would go to red carpet events together, speak at award ceremonies for each other, and appear on talk shows side by side. When asked about her friendship with Carroll, Struthers once said, "He was more than just someone I worked with. He was my family. He made me feel safe in a world that rarely does." Everyone who knew them thought their friendship was built on respect, loyalty, and genuine love. Fans loved watching their relationship, and most people assumed they would stay friends for the rest of their lives. But as time went on, small cracks began to appear in their friendship. At first, the changes were so subtle that most people didn't notice anything was wrong. But something important had shifted between them, and that shift would eventually destroy their relationship completely. As All in the Family continued for several seasons, the energy between Carroll O'Connor and Sally Struthers began to change. On the surface, everything still looked normal. They continued to perform their scenes well and smile during interviews, but people who worked closely with them started to notice that something felt different. The problems began with small disagreements during rehearsals. Struthers had become more confident as an actress over the years, and she started speaking up more about her lines and asking for changes to the script. This wasn't unusual for experienced actors, but O'Connor had always had a lot of control over the show's direction, and some people thought he didn't like her new assertiveness. O'Connor cared deeply about the show and wanted to protect its message and quality. Some people who worked there said he began to see Struthers' suggestions as disruptive. It wasn't that he was being mean, he was just worried that the careful balance they had created might be getting upset. He was a perfectionist, and she was growing and changing as an actress, which created some distance between them. They also started to disagree about the show's content. Episodes that dealt with serious social issues sometimes sparked quiet arguments between them. O'Connor wanted the show to be more realistic and sometimes darker, while Struthers preferred to focus on the hopeful and loving aspects of her character. These disagreements were never loud or dramatic, but there was definitely tension, like two artists trying to paint the same picture, but with different ideas about how it should look. Another issue was screen time. As the show created spin-offs like The Jeffersons and Maude, the writers began changing storylines, and Struthers' character appeared less frequently. While this was partly because she was pursuing other opportunities, some people suspected that resentment was building. She was still young and ambitious, and being given fewer scenes may have felt like a betrayal. O'Connor, who was always protective of the show, whose direction might have seen her outside ambitions as disloyalty. One moment that people remembered clearly happened at an awards ceremony where the cast was being honored. O'Connor gave a heartfelt speech thanking people, but he noticeably didn't mention Struthers by name. She smiled and clapped along with everyone else, but cameras caught something colder in her expression. Just a brief moment, but it was unmistakable to those who were watching closely. Still, nothing was said publicly. There were no open fights or dramatic interviews, but people who worked on the show could feel that something was wrong. The magnetic friendship that had once been so obvious was slowly falling apart, and unfortunately, this was happening just as O'Connor's personal life was about to be hit by tragedy. In 1995, Carroll O'Connor's world was shattered when his only son, Hugh O'Connor, died by suicide after struggling with drug addiction. The news shocked everyone in Hollywood, but for O'Connor, it wasn't just a personal loss. It became a mission that would consume his life for years to come. The pain was overwhelming and very public. Everything else in his life, acting, interviews, old friendships, suddenly seemed unimportant. He threw himself into a legal battle, going after the man he blamed for supplying the drugs that led to his son's death. He testified before lawmakers, pushed for stronger drug laws, and appeared on national television calling for changes to help other families. His whole personality seemed to change. The interviews that had once been cheerful and light became somber and emotional. Even his voice sounded different, shaky, heavy with grief, and scarred by loss. During this terrible time, fans began to notice something strange. As tributes and messages of support poured in from all over the entertainment industry, one voice was notably missing: Sally Struthers. She made no public statement, gave no interviews, and didn't appear by his side during his darkest hour. People started asking why the woman who had once called him her second father was nowhere to be found. Some people close to O'Connor suggested that he felt abandoned by her silence. Whether Struthers stayed quiet out of respect, fear of saying the wrong thing, or because they had already grown apart emotionally, it clearly hurt him deeply. He had lost his son, and in the months that followed, it seemed like he had lost her too. Later, at a memorial service for Hugh, almost every cast member from All in the Family showed up to support O'Connor, but Struthers wasn't there. Her absence wasn't just noticed, it became a topic of conversation. Some people said she had sent a private letter, while others insisted she had been asked not to come. But whatever the truth was, O'Connor's expression during the ceremony showed both grief and disappointment. In interviews around this time, he became more withdrawn and guarded when talking about his former co-stars. The warmth he had once shown when asked about Struthers was completely gone. Instead, he would simply nod and change the subject, never sharing memories or elaborating on their past friendship. For someone who used to light up when her name was mentioned, the change was impossible to ignore. Some people thought that losing his son had hardened O'Connor and made him shut people out. Others believed the emotional distance between him and Struthers had been growing for a while, but the tragedy had made it permanent. The grief had built a wall between them that neither seemed willing or able to tear down. Just when it seemed like things might settle down, the quiet break between them would become much more visible, making it clear to everyone that their friendship was truly over. The final break between Carroll O'Connor and Sally Struthers wasn't caused by a scandal or public fight. Instead, it was marked by a quiet but unmistakable end to their relationship, something that happened privately but affected Hollywood for years to come. According to people who knew them, the final breaking point came during planning for a reunion project that never fully happened. Producers had suggested creating a retrospective special about All in the Family, hoping to bring the original cast together for fans. Everyone assumed O'Connor and Struthers would reunite, even if just for the show. But behind the scenes, something went terribly wrong. During the early planning stages, sources say there was a private phone call between the two that turned unexpectedly tense. The exact details of that conversation have never been fully revealed, but one insider described it as sad and final. What started as polite conversation reportedly shifted into discussion of unresolved grievances. O'Connor, still raw from years of grief over his son's death, allegedly expressed disappointment in how Struthers had handled things after Hugh's passing. Struthers, caught off guard, tried to explain her actions, but the wounds were too deep. There was no shouting or dramatic argument, just silence, and then the phone line went dead. Some people close to the situation believe the problem wasn't just about grief. Politics had also become a quiet source of division between them. In the years after the show's success, Struthers had become increasingly vocal about her activism and support for progressive causes. O'Connor, while not openly confrontational, was known to hold more private and sometimes opposing views. These differences, which had once seemed unimportant, may have added to the friction as both navigated public attention in their later years. The aftermath of their phone call was telling. When the reunion project finally aired in a modified format without full cast participation, fans noticed that Struthers and O'Connor were never shown together. They had separate interviews, told separate stories, and represented separate legacies. For two people who had once seemed inseparable, it was a jarring reality. During this period, journalists began asking more direct questions about their relationship. In one interview, Struthers was asked whether she still kept in touch with O'Connor. Her smile faded as she said quietly, "We had a good run. Sometimes life pulls people in different directions." It was a polite answer, but it said everything people needed to know. O'Connor, on the other hand, never spoke directly about the phone call or the failed reunion, but his tone in interviews changed dramatically. When All in the Family came up, he would talk about the show's message, its impact, and its legacy, but rarely about the people involved, and almost never about her. From that point forward, they were no longer friends, just former co-stars connected by a legendary show and unforgettable history. While no public feud ever erupted, it was clear that the bond that had once held them together had quietly and permanently unraveled. For years after their final falling out, Carroll O'Connor and Sally Struthers lived completely separate lives. Both remained in the public eye, but their paths never crossed again, at least not publicly. For longtime fans of All in the Family, that silence spoke louder than any interview could have. During television retrospectives and reunion panels, Struthers would participate, but O'Connor would be absent. When he did appear at events, she wasn't there. People noticed that the warm, light-hearted stories that had once flowed freely between them were replaced with awkward deflections and uncomfortable pauses. Whenever journalists asked about each other, both offered safe, carefully worded replies that revealed very little. In one interview, O'Connor was asked whether he kept in touch with his former television daughter. His eyes shifted away as he muttered, "We had some good times. Things change." That was all he said. No fond memory, no laughter. Just a distant tone from a man who had once been her biggest supporter. Struthers had her own version of this silence. During a morning show appearance in the early 2000s, she was asked who she missed most from the original cast. She named everyone except him. When the host followed up, she simply said, "Some things are too personal to get into." It was vague but heavy with meaning. Industry insiders began to confirm what fans had long suspected. The two had not spoken in years. One source described their rift as unfixable, not because of hatred, but because too much had been left unsaid for too long. They were sometimes invited to the same award events, but they would sit apart and never greet each other. People who had known them during their prime found it hard to believe. These were two people who had once finished each other's sentences, and now they passed each other like strangers. As O'Connor's health began to decline, some people thought Struthers might reach out to him. She didn't. Whether it was pride, regret, or unresolved pain, she stayed quiet. For O'Connor, the window for reconciliation was slowly closing, but the silence had become their new normal. However, that silence wouldn't last forever. because at age 74, Carroll O'Connor finally decided to speak up, and what he said changed everything fans thought they knew about their relationship. In a rare televised interview just a few years before his death, Carroll O'Connor was asked about the personal toll his career had taken on him. The conversation started like many others, discussing the impact of All in the Family, the weight of fame, and his advocacy work after his son's death. But then, almost unexpectedly, the conversation shifted. The interviewer brought up his former castmates, and when Sally Struthers' name was mentioned, O'Connor paused. What followed was a moment of quiet vulnerability that no one had seen from him before. "I wish things had ended differently with Sally," he said. "We had something really special. Then life got in the way." It was the first time he had publicly acknowledged the break in their relationship. There were no rehearsed lines or careful redirections, just a statement that felt raw and honest. He didn't go into specific details, but the pain was obvious. He hinted that grief had made him distant and harder to reach. "When my son died, I changed," he said. "I shut people out. Some were understanding, some not so much." Though he never blamed Struthers directly, the implication was clear. The silence between them hadn't been entirely one-sided. He spoke of regret, not anger or betrayal, just deep sadness. "Sally was like a daughter to me," he added. "We were so close, maybe too close for it to survive everything that came after." That line struck viewers particularly hard, especially those who remembered their on-screen bond. It was as if O'Connor was admitting that after all those years, the loss of that relationship still haunted him. What made this confession even more striking was its timing. O'Connor wasn't promoting a new show or seeking attention. He was simply reflecting, perhaps sensing that his time was limited. In that moment, fans saw a different side of him, not the tough, unshakable Archie Bunker, but a man filled with quiet sorrow and unresolved emotion. The interview aired on a Sunday night, and by Monday morning, it was everywhere. Headlines focused on his comments about Struthers. Social media lit up with fans expressing shock, sadness, and curiosity. For years, people had speculated about what happened between them. Now there was confirmation that something real and deeply personal had ended their friendship, and O'Connor had carried that weight until the end. Some people who watched the interview believed it was his way of reaching out, a final attempt at making peace, not to rekindle the friendship, but to acknowledge what had been and lost. Others saw it as a release, a man unburdening himself of a truth he had carried for too long. But what about Sally Struthers? How did she respond to this unexpected revelation? Her answer came later, and it revealed just how much she had been holding back as well. Sally Struthers stayed quiet for weeks after Carroll O'Connor's emotional interview. When she finally responded, it was through a little-known podcast. No fanfare, no headlines, just a quiet conversation that revealed her side of the story. When asked about O'Connor's comments, she admitted, "I watched every second of it, and I cried." It was her first time speaking openly about their estrangement, and what followed was filled with regret and sorrow. She confirmed that they had not spoken in years, not because of anger, but because of timing and grief that neither of them knew how to handle. "I didn't know what to say when Hugh died," she said. "I was afraid I'd make it worse, so I stayed silent, and that was the worst thing I could have done." Struthers revealed that she had tried to reconnect with O'Connor, but he had changed after his son's death. "He was hurting, and I didn't know how to reach him. That distance turned into silence, then years." She admitted that she had thought about fixing things many times but kept waiting for the right moment. "I kept hoping for the perfect time to reach out. Then it was gone." Despite everything, she never stopped caring about him. She had kept letters and photos from their time together, and even rewatched old episodes of All in the Family when she missed him. Their story wasn't one of betrayal or hatred. It was about love that couldn't survive the weight of pain and misunderstanding. Neither person was the villain in their story. They were just two people who had been forever connected but let time and circumstances get in the way of reconciliation. The tragedy was that both of them carried regret about how things ended, but neither knew how to bridge the gap that had grown between them. When Carroll O'Connor passed away in 2001, the world mourned the loss of a television legend. But for Sally Struthers, his death marked the end of a chapter in her life that she had never been able to close properly. In a quiet gesture that spoke volumes, she attended his private memorial service. She didn't come as a celebrity seeking attention, but as someone saying goodbye to a piece of her own history. She didn't speak at the service or do interviews afterward, but people who were there said she stood near the back of the room, holding a single white rose. When the ceremony ended, she walked up to his photo, placed the rose gently beside it, whispered something under her breath, and walked away with tears in her eyes. It was a moment of private grief and final goodbye that showed how much their relationship had meant to her, despite how it ended. Years later, in a documentary celebrating All in the Family, Struthers finally offered a closing thought on their relationship. "What we had was real. It didn't end the way I wanted, but I will never forget him." Her voice trembled as she spoke, but her words were clear. The hurt remained, but so did the love. Their story wasn't a fairy tale with a happy ending. It wasn't neat or tidy, but it was honest and human. They were two lives forever linked by one of the most powerful shows in television history. Behind all the laughter and fame was a relationship filled with genuine warmth, unfortunate missteps, and the kind of deep pain that only comes from losing someone you truly care about. In the end, what Carroll O'Connor and Sally Struthers shared was far more than just a television partnership. It was a real, complicated bond that touched millions of viewers and continues to linger in the hearts of those who watched their story unfold. Their friendship may have ended in sadness, but the love and connection they once shared remains an important part of television history and a reminder of how precious and fragile human relationships can be.